everyone. In this week's episode, the students get a little further along on wrapping up that engine replacement on the Honda Civic. The oil pan goes on the 48 Chevy engine, and we show you how to do a parasitic drain test on a customer's truck. You may have also noticed that I've begun changing the titles on our episodes, as was advised by Jonathan Rand and Andrew Williams, and it already looks like it's paid off as we're getting a lot more views. I was also told that I should remind you to make sure that you haven't already subscribed to the channel and make sure that you click notifications. Thanks for tuning in.
I'm chasing all the holes for the pan bolts before installing the oil pan.
This is a good idea with any of the holes for an engine build, as it will help make your torquing more accurate.
The guys are putting the oil pan back on the 48, so they've got their cork gasket in place, which was in 4 pieces, and you're going to see they're going to put a little bit of sealer on the corners, because the only time you use sealer in this type of situation is where gaskets meet. You don't use it in the place of a gasket. So they're going to put some sealer in each of those corners. Okay, and they'll do the other ones. And then we'll put the pan in place and get these torqued down. I want to talk a little bit about how the connecting rods are lubricated on the 48 Chevy. This piece right here, the oil pump will feed oil through this chamber, which feeds that tube and this rail. And then you'll notice that at the end of each one of these rails, times 6, because there's 6 connecting rods, there's a little jet here. So you can see that one there pretty good. And what it does is it sprays oil. Now the idea is that especially at higher RPMs, what happens is it shoots oil directly into what they're calling these dippers here. So as it's going around, a jet spray of oil will go into that, and that's what pressurizes and lubricates each one of the connecting rod journals. So it's really important to make sure that they are aimed correctly so that they're getting the proper lubrication. Now we don't have the gauge that they're talking about that we need to make sure that they're correct. But again, since this was a running engine, I'm not too worried about that, and based on what we saw as we pulled the engine apart, it looked like everything was getting lubricated pretty well. So we're just going to check to make sure we don't see anything clogged or bent, and then we're going to go ahead and get this oil pan put back on. Alright, you can see it's fitting pretty tight. There's a gap here, which is would be pretty normal with our cork gasket because it's sitting pretty high here. So once they get all the bolts in and get it started, it's going to pull down and compress that gasket very nicely. Kevin's torquing the oil pan screws. This time he's using a regular torque wrench because the torque spec on this is going to be a little higher than that screwdriver torque wrench that you saw last week will allow for. He just has to make sure that it's in there tight. And he feels for it to release, and he knows he's reached his torque.
This week we're doing a battery drain test. The customer's complaint was that when he parked the vehicle at night, got up the next morning to start it, the battery was dead. So there's something in the vehicle that is causing the battery to drain down overnight, and I'm going to show you how to figure that out. The first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that the fuses inside of the meter are working, because a lot of times they're blown and people don't even realize it and they get erroneous readings. So what you want to do is get your meter hooked up to read ohms. You're going to set it to the omega sign, and then you can read a milliamp and the amp fuse internally by taking the red probe and putting it into the meter where the leads would go. And if you get a reading, then you know the fuses are good. If not, then you're going to have to open the meter up and fix that first before you can get started on the test. This isn't the actual vehicle we're performing this test on, but I at least wanted to show you how to set this up. So now that we know the internal fuses are working, we're going to take our red lead and move it over to the uppercase A or the 10 amp circuit and turn it on to amps. And then what we're going to do is hook it in series. We're going to take, I've got the ground cable loosened from here, then I'm going to hook this to the ground terminal cable itself. And then I'm going to take the black lead and I'm going to hook it to the actual battery terminal. So again, we are in series. We don't have the battery hooked up. Now what you're going to notice here in my reading is I've got 6 to 7 thousandths of an amp. Okay, that's nothing. That's probably the clock for his radio. So we don't have any issues here with this one. Then when I take it loose, we go down to nothing because it's not reading any current because the battery is unhooked. So right now this vehicle has no battery drain, which is good. Now if we unhook the radio fuse, then this would go down to 0, and which is also what you want to do when you're performing this test, so you don't get erroneous readings.
Customer came in with a complaint of a battery drain. So his battery is draining overnight, and then he comes out the next morning and it's dead, but it will charge up and restart throughout the day, but there is a drain on it. We've got 3/10 of an amp draw. That is enough to drain the battery overnight. So we're pulling fuses one at a time until the current goes down, and then we'll see which circuit that's on.
You see that Kevin's pulling the fuses one at a time while monitoring the meter, and he's waiting for the current to drop. Then he knows which circuit the draw is on.
Alright, so it looks like Kevin found the one that's causing our draw. That's 3 thousandths of an amp. We're not worried about that. Let's see what fuse it is, what amp it is, and what circuit it's on. After we learned that the 50 amp fuse controls power to some of the circuits inside the passenger compartment, we then got busy pulling fuses inside. We're now showing 0.163 amps. So as we start to pull the fuses from inside, we'll see which circuit that current draw is on. So Kevin's going to start working on the inside of the passenger compartment to determine which fuse that 1/10 of an amp draw is on. Alright, so after pulling that 15 amp fuse, we're down to 1/100th or 5/100ths of an amp. So our draw is on that circuit. So we're going to look that up and see what circuit that's on, and then we should be able to locate our problem. We traced that parasitic drain to a 15 amp fuse under the dash. It controls the interior lighting, but it also controls power windows. So we've got the fuse in there. We're just going to have him pull the fuse out each night, and then the next time it comes in, we'll get a wiring diagram and start tracing it, trying to figure out where the problem is.
With the engine held in place with the upper mounts, the students are taking the subframe and putting it into place.
Probably going to have to force the rack and pinion up at the same time. Stop, do the other one. Get them all to that point, and then we'll go back a second time. For the shifter bolt, you can see that there's a tab right here. That's a lock tab. So with the bolt in place, they're going to take and bend this tab down, and there's one on the other side, and that's going to keep the bolt from backing off due to vibration. You see now the ears are folded down so the bolt can't back out. With the engine securely in place and the subframe back under it, we're getting busy hooking up connectors and hoses. Eric's putting on the heater hoses now.
Now that the pull tractor panels are done, I'm getting back to work on the Nova.
You see Alejandro's got his die powder on, so when he's blocking with 220 he can find his low spots if anything needs to be fixed, or if it stays flat, we'll be ready to 400 wet sand and spray on some paint.
This vehicle came in for an oil change and a maintenance inspection. Needed both low beam headlights, at least one of them was definitely out. But on this one, as Dylan was taking it apart, he noticed that the connection... I'm looking through here, I can't see it. This Hyundai came in for an oil change and a maintenance inspection. Both low beam headlights were out. The passenger side was definitely bad, but on the driver's side, Dylan had noticed that the connection was loose for the bulb here, so as we put the bulb in and he was tightening everything down, it went out again. So if you wiggled it, it would work intermittently. So what we did is we pulled the connection loose and we squeezed these a little bit to make them tighter against the bulb, put it all back together, and then it should work fine. We'll get that piece clicked back in place and then we'll put in the bulb and we'll see what we have. Now it's very important to not touch the bulbs with your fingers because the oil from your fingers can cause them to burn up or to burn out. Alright, so once he gets that brought into place and the connection is there, we're going to turn on the headlights and see if it works. The headlight's working, so we'll get all this put back together, get the bumper clipped back, and we're done with this.
3, 2, 1, go.
These are 4 of my Auto 1 students who are aspiring to be members of the 2nd engine building team. Hopefully they'll be beginning their practices very soon.
Go ahead.
Go.
Get that done quick.
Next time on Bulldog Builds, we'll hopefully have that parasitic drain tracked down on that Ford truck. We'll have more of the Honda Civic engine put together, and we'll have more of the 48 Chevy engine done. See you next week.